Hi, everybody. I wanted to make a video for you because I've heard that some people didn't get a chance to attend our town hall meeting the other night, as well as because of some technical difficulties, we were not able to record it. And so, what I wanted to do is, I wanted to do a hopefully a little bit shorter version of that on video. And then you can kind of watch it. You can invite people to share it, those kind of things as well. Wanted to just say, first off, I have been blessed, myself and Les, for being your pastor for the last 15 plus years. And we are grateful for this opportunity to serve you and all the good friendships and memories that faith has held and will hold forever in my heart. So thank you all for that. I also wanted to just take some time to help us all understand the pastoral transition plan that the elders from session are laying out for us. Because the main thing, there's two things I want us to know. One is I want us to all kind of know what the process is going to look like. But then, secondly, I also want to make sure that because we know the process and we know where we're going, we don't lose any momentum in our process of church transformation that we've been in for about 2 years now. And when you think about changing pastors in a church, things have changed a little bit. I'm going to share some screens here and just put some slides up just to kind of help walk us through that. So I'm going to go away and the slides are going to come back. But things have changed a lot since the last time Faith had a need for a new pastor. And so what has happened, and this is the process that has worked in the denomination that we were a part of before, is what I call a traditional transition process, which means that when the old pastor leaves, there's a period of when no pastor is there, and then they hire what was called an interim pastor. Now the word is transitional pastor. And they would be there and they would help the church understand what they want to become, where they're going. And then they would start the search process. And once they've chosen a new pastor, that the transitional pastor or interim pastor would leave, and you'd have a month or two again with no pastor before the new pastor arrived on the scene. This was in church, the people studying churches, they thought this was the best way to move between pastors. What we found is that in most churches, what happens during this transition process is that the church kind of gets bogged down and loses momentum. And that's the last thing we want to do. And so this also is usually a process that is still used in some churches. It is usually used for churches that don't have a good sense of who they are and where they're going. And that doesn't apply to Faith. So that's one option that's out there. A second one is what's called a straight new hire, which basically means your old pastor leaves, you start the process of searching for a new pastor, and you bring a new one in. What happens when it happens in that regard? Usually that pastor that is brought in usually only lasts 2.5 years. Statistically, they've looked at that, and that's the case. And that, again, is not the situation that we want to have at Faith. The last situation is what's called a succession process. And what a succession process means is that the old pastor is there and gives the church enough lead time to let them know that he or she is planning to leave, that they are able to work through the transitional process so that they begin to search for a new pastor while the old one is still there. They hire a new pastor, that person comes on, and there's a period of overlap between the old pastor and the new pastor. What church experts are telling us now is that is far and away the best process for healthy churches who have a good understanding of where they're going and what they want to be about as a church. This is the process that Session has chosen for us to follow here at Faith, is the succession process. Beyond that, there are some things that faith has as a part of who we are right now that really help us in this succession process. Um, One of the things that a transitional pastor brings is they do a lot of the work that Pastor Debbie and I have been doing with all of us as part of our church transformation process. We've been in this church transformation process for a couple years. And a lot of the things that we've learned over this 2 years are a lot of the things that are brought in a transitional setting. And so we've already done a lot of the transitional work. And in particular, what we're talking about is understanding who we are as a church, understanding what our mission is, and having a strategy for how we're going to accomplish that. That's all the work that typically happens between pastors. We've already done a lot of that work. Um, Beyond that, we also have a couple things working in our favor. One is that we have, as part of our transformation cohort, I've had a coach for the last 2 years. And that coach is a man by the name of Bill Enns. Not that that's a name you should recognize, but simply he is a man that has over 30 years of training as well as doing transitional pastorates. And so he has a lot of experience, and he's been guiding me to help us in this process. And as you'll see in just a moment, he also is going to come and help us in a couple areas as well. So we have a couple things going for us here at Faith that a lot of other churches don't have. And so I think that bodes well for us in the succession planning process. Beyond that, the other thing too is that I have been trained as a transitional pastor. I am just short of being certified as one. And so I have a good idea of all the things that need to happen as well. And that also will help with me being here during our transitional process to help us stay on track and do the things that we need to do to have a successful transition. So just a couple of the things that are working for us here. The next thing I want us to just touch base on, and this is the thing that is probably important for all of us to have a good handle on, is that during this transitional time, we are going to have a number of teams that you see here listed in front of you. One is a transitional team, and what this team will do is twofold. One, their responsibility is to help all of us at Faith in the emotional experience of transitioning from one pastor to a new one. This is in many ways experiencing grief when a pastor leaves. And so we will feel all kinds of emotions through this transitional period. The transition team will help us. The transition team will be made up of a couple elders as well as some members from our congregation. And they will be working first off to do that, kind of help us emotionally. The other responsibility that they have will be to put together what's known as the church profile, which is basically a document that explains who we are, what we're about, and where we're going as a church to prospective candidates. And so they'll do that because they're going to do that and then send it to our session, who will approve it, and then it will go to our presbytery for approval before we can actually start the search process. And so this transitional team is going to be a team that's going to be at work for a while, starting from right now all the way through the search process, and then the hiring of a new pastor, then saying goodbye to me and welcoming the new pastor on after I'm gone. And so they're going to have a long-term, and by long-term, I mean probably a year, maybe a year and a half, to help the transition process. And this transition team is already, Session has been trying to discern some names, and they are already in the process of inviting some folks to consider joining that transitional team. The other thing that will happen is there will be a nominating team. A nominating team is the group that will submit a slate of names to you as the congregation to elect for the third one here, the pastor nominating committee. The the session is going to function as the pastor nominating, as the nominating team for the pastor nominating committee. Hope that's not too confusing. As I was saying that, I'm like, oh my. So the pastor nominating committee's responsibility is going to be doing the searching and the hiring of a new pastor. They are a group of people that will, again, be probably 5 to 7 people that will be elected by the congregation and will conduct the search and then come up with a final candidate that they will recommend to the congregation to vote in as your new pastor. So that's going to be their main responsibility, is just simply conducting the search and coming up with a candidate to present to the congregation. The fourth team, as you can see here, what we're endeavoring to do is something that we don't want to do in our own strength and in our own wisdom. This has to be something that God is directing and leading us in this process. And so there needs to be a prayer team. There needs to be a prayer team that would undergird this whole transition process. And they're going to cover everything in prayer, from the transition team to the selection of candidates for the pastor nominating committee, for the work of the pastor nominating committee, for the candidates that they're going to interview, and then for the whole hiring process. And so this is a really important piece for us. As you look at these transition teams, these are going to be filled with people. The transition team and the nominating team and the prayer team will be filled with people from you, from the congregation, along with a couple elders along the way. In addition, I'm going to act as a resource for each of these different teams and committees as well. I'm going to help the transition team in the development of the church profile that you will be able to see once it's completed and approved. I'm going to give direction to the session as they begin to try to discern who are the right people to be a part of the pastor nominating committee. And then once the pastor nominating committee has been formed, I'll be working with them just to help them understand and to be able to conduct a good search in terms of what to be looking for. How do you listen for sermons so you know a good one from a not so good one? And I'll be working with the prayer team just to encourage them and keep them up to date. Part of the transition team, I should probably just add also, is going to be part of making sure that all of us in the congregation kind of know where we are in this process. So they're going to be they're going to have a communication piece that are a part of it as well. The other thing that we have going for us is we have some resources that are going to be available for us. ECO, our denomination, has just put together a guide on how to do a pastoral search and transition. I've looked at it. There are some good pieces in it that we will for sure use. That's free and offered to us. Mission Insight is a demographic company that, because we are an ECO church, we have free access to that, and we'll be using that to help gather some demographic information about our community around us that we will see laid out in our church profile report. ProScan is something that we will use at the PNC level, perhaps with the PNC and definitely with the final candidates that they screen. It is something that is used to help make sure that the candidates they're looking at and the job we're asking them to do are a good fit. And so that's something that we will have to pay for through ECO, but it is well worth it because it gives us one more confirming factor that we're looking at the right candidate or candidates. Bill Enns, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be a resource in our back pocket. And the reason I say cost is because he has said that he is going to train, he would be willing to train our transition team once it's formed. There will be a small cost involved in doing that, but I think that will pay huge dividends for us as well. Beyond that, I'm going to recommend to session that we continue to have Bill be a coach with me through this transition process. I typically meet with him twice a month and we talk about whatever it is that's going on at Faith. And so that is something that I think is another cost that just helps us stay on track to make sure we're moving in the right direction. And then I put me in there because I'm going to be a resource to those teams that I mentioned. And guess what? I'm free. So those are a couple things for us. Now, you may be asking, how long is this going to take? It seems like it takes a long time. Well, part of our process for succession planning is to try to give us enough time so that there is a little bit of lead time overlapping between my leaving and the new pastor coming. And so what I've done is I've just put some of the very kind of highlight things that will need to happen as a part of the succession, just so you can see them. What we're doing right now is I'm announcing my retirement, and the session is already in process of forming a transition team. When it's formed, we'll let you know who it is and that they've begun their work. The March to April timeframe of this year, you can see these are some of the things. Not everything is going to happen in that time frame, but those are kind of date markers of kind of chronologically the things that have to happen. Session is going to approve the church profile as well as a job description that the transition team will create. The forming of a pastor nominating committee will happen sometime in this spring, we hope. And then the PNC will begin its process and searching for a candidate. We are anticipating that's going to take a few months. By the time they get together and get formed, they get the information out, receive information forms from possible candidates back, sort through them, do interviews, do second interviews, do background checks, do reference checks, hear them preach, and then they will probably invite in a couple of candidates on site to interview in person. We hope that will all happen, and then they will have a candidate to recommend to you by sometime early next year. That the congregation would receive the candidate and would approve it, and then the pastor would start as soon as that person can get here. And there would be a period of overlap between that new pastor being here and me still being here. And what we're looking at is probably a 3 to 6 month overlap window between both of us being here. And you can see I'll be helping the new pastor find their way. The transition team will still be doing their work as well as the session. And then as we get to the end of my time, you will vote to finalize my relationship with you coming to an end. Those are just some of the kind of big high level pieces that will need to happen for this succession process. And so let me do where do we go here? I'm trying to escape. Let's try this. There we go. So hopefully you are, there we go. There we go, we're back. That gives you a little bit of the process. I know this is not going to answer all your questions, and we had some questions that were asked at the town hall meeting. Everything from, how are we going to pay for this? Because we will have to build in some costs for the search process. Everything from having 2 pastors on staff at the same time for that overlap period, to costs involved in the search process, whether it is bringing in candidates here. Sometimes members of the PNC go to somewhere where the pastor is located to hear them speak. We'll see. That'll all have to be played out. But there'll also be some costs probably in relocating that pastor and their family to Minnetonka and Hopkins area. It'll also potentially be, depending on where they're coming from and their financial situation, one of the questions that was asked is, are we going to be able to offer, if needed, and again, I stress if needed, some financial assistance, whether it's in a loan or a grant or whatever, who knows, to help the pastor find housing around Faith Church, because we do believe that it's important that the new pastor is in the community in which they are serving. We have right now, we are sitting in a pretty good financial spot. And I will tell you just briefly that our giving has been very good. And I thank you for that. And I think we are blessed by that in the midst of this COVID. And so thank you for that. Continue to be faithful. And what that means is that our giving has been what we have anticipated our budget would be. And our expenses, because of COVID, because of a lot of factors, because we haven't had our children's ministry person on staff, but we've had that salary budgeted, we're underspent on our expenses, which means we have a surplus right now, which is, again, one of those God blessings kinds of things. In addition, we received the proceeds from the Almond House. Those are all things that can perhaps be used to help offset some of these costs. Session has not made any decisions on where any of those costs will be coming from. When they do, we'll let you know. I think that's part of our responsibility, is to keep you informed of where we are in this succession process, so you feel good about what's going on and you know what's going on. And that's why I'm making this video. So those are just a couple of things, just a real brief recap of the succession planning, and a couple things I'd like you to do. One, pray for this process. Pray for this process, because this is something that God has got to be leading. Otherwise, we are not going to find the right candidate. And so we have to be praying for God's direction and God's wisdom for all the teams that are going to do their work. In addition, one of the things that we're going to do for the pastor nominating committee is we need to screen people who may be interested in that. So we're going to be putting together a questionnaire. If you are interested, or if you know of someone who might be interested that's a member of Faith that would like to be part of the pastor nominating committee, that form will be available shortly on our website. So we'll talk more about that as we get closer, but just know that we're going to ask people to fill that out so that the session can make a good informed decision on who they believe God is leading towards being a part of that PNC. And then finally, if you have other questions, which you very easily could, because I was kind of flying through this stuff, don't hesitate to email me. Don't hesitate to ask me on a Sunday or when you see me around questions. I want to be here for you. And so email me at buck@faithchurchmn.org. So once again, I have been humbled to be your pastor, and I have been honored to be your pastor. And I believe that what we have been doing up to this point has laid a very good groundwork for the new pastor to begin to build on and flourish for us as a church. I think God has great things in store for us as a church. And so I'm going to be watching, even though I may not be there on Sundays after I'm gone. Know that I will be continuing to pray for Faith Church, because you all are very, very dear to me. So from Les and I, God bless, and I'll talk with you real soon. Bye-bye now.